Everything you learned in school is wrong. Not outdated, not incomplete, wrong. And Richard Feynman proved it in 1952 with one lecture in Brazil that exposed the entire education system as intellectual fraud. The students had memorized everything, every formula, every equation, every definition their professors demanded, perfect grades, perfect recitation. But when Feynman asked them to explain what any of it meant, silence, complete silence, because they understood nothing. And here's what should make you angry. Your teachers knew this would happen to you too. They did it anyway. This wasn't about Brazilian education being inferior. Feynman discovered the same disease in American universities, European institutions, every credentialed system that claims to educate. The method that gave you that degree, that certification, oh, that sense of accomplishment, it was designed to make you feel smart while keeping you ignorant. And the proof is brutal, because if you can't explain what you learned to a child, you don't understand it. You memorized it. There's a difference. Schools bet their entire reputation that you'd never discover this difference. Feynman spent his life exposing it. By the end of this, you'll understand why you've forgotten 90% of what you learned, and why it was never your fault. The system trained you to fail, and they called it education. Here's how deep the lie goes. Schools teach you to worship credentials, degrees, certifications, titles, institutions. The more prestigious the name, the more legitimate the knowledge, right? Wrong. Feynman exposed this with one demonstration that lasted 60 seconds. January 28th, 1986. The Space Shuttle Challenger had exploded. NASA's top engineers, PhDs from MIT, Stanford, Caltech, spent months investigating. Complex reports, technical jargon, sophisticated analysis. Then Feynman walked into the hearing room with a glass of ice water and a piece of rubber. He dropped the rubber in the ice water, pulled it out, showed it had lost its flexibility. "I believe that has some significance for our problem," he said. In 60 seconds, he demonstrated what months of credentialed expertise had obscured. The O-rings failed in cold weather. That's it. No complex equations needed. No prestigious degrees required, just direct observation and clear thinking. But here's what they never told you. Those engineers weren't stupid. They were trained by the same system that trained you. Are trained to make things complicated, to hide behind jargon, to confuse complexity with understanding. Because if you can make something sound complicated enough, no one questions whether you actually understand it. This is why your degree doesn't make you intelligent. It makes you credentialed. And Feynman proved those are opposite things. The lie starts early, way before university. It starts the moment a teacher tells you to memorize the quadratic formula without explaining why it works. The moment they make you recite dates without understanding why events happened. The moment they reward you for giving back exactly what they gave you. No more, no less, no questions asked. Feynman's father understood this. He was a uniform salesman, not a scientist. But he taught his son something no school ever would. They'd walk through the woods together, and his father would point at a bird. "See that bird? It's a brown-throated thrush, but in Germany they call it a Hülsenvogel. In Chinese it's a Chongling. You can know the name of that bird in every language, and when you're done, you'll know nothing about the bird. You'll only know about humans in different places and what they call the bird. Now that bird, when it pecks at its feathers, it's getting rid of lice that bother it. The lice eat the protein in the feathers. That's what you need to know." One conversation, 1930s Long Island, and it taught Feynman the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. Schools never taught you that difference. They can't. Because their entire system is built on names, on labels, on credentials that mean nothing. In his book, What Do You Care What Other People Think?, Feynman wrote, "I learned very early the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. Schools teach names. They call it education. Feynman learned to see past names to mechanisms. He called it understanding. And the gap between those two things explains why you've struggled, but the proof gets worse." 1952. The University of Rio de Janeiro invites Feynman to teach physics. This should be straightforward. Teach the material, students learn the material, everyone succeeds. Except something was broken. Students attended every lecture, took perfect notes, memorized every equation. They could solve any problem he gave them if it matched the examples in the textbook. But change one variable, ask them to apply the same principle to a different context, and they couldn't do it. So Feynman tested them. He asked, when you have light going through a material, what's the difference between light that's reflected and light that goes through? Standard physics question. These students had memorized the answer months ago, but they just stared at him. Finally, one student raised his hand. The light that reflects is perpendicular to the surface. He'd memorized that sentence, had no idea what it meant. Feynman realized these weren't students. They were parrots, trained to repeat sounds that meant nothing to them. And the professors were fine with it, encouraged it even. Because if everyone's pretending to understand and no one asks real questions, the system keeps running smoothly. Surely you're joking? Yeah, I'm Mr. Feynman. He described the moment he understood. After a lot of investigation, I finally figured out that the students had memorized everything, but they didn't know what anything meant. The entire system was theatrical. Everyone playing their role. Teachers pretending to teach. Students pretending to learn. Degrees awarded for successful pretending. Sound familiar? Because that's what happened to you too. You memorized material for tests, forgot it after, and convinced yourself this was normal. It's not normal. It's systematic fraud. And they gave you a diploma for surviving it. Here's what schools actually taught you. Obedience disguised as intelligence. You learned to sit still for hours, follow instructions without questioning, produce exactly what authority demands, memorize what they tell you to memorize, forget what they tell you to forget, and most importantly, never ever ask if any of it actually makes sense. Feynman did the opposite. He questioned everything, not to be difficult. Because understanding requires questions, and schools hate questions. Real questions, anyway. They love questions that can be answered by memorizing more content. They despise questions that expose the content as meaningless. The Feynman technique, what people call his learning method, wasn't some revolutionary discovery. It was just refusing to lie to himself. The process was simple. Take a concept you think you understand, try to explain it in plain language to someone who knows nothing about it, find the gaps where your explanation falls apart. Go back and actually learn those parts. Schools do the reverse. They give you technical language first, makes you feel sophisticated. They test whether you can repeat that language back, makes them feel like they taught you something. They never make you explain it simply, because that would reveal no one understands it, not even the teachers. Feynman discovered this when he was young, kept using it his entire life. In the Feynman Lectures on Physics, he explained quantum mechanics to freshmen, not dumbed down, simplified. There's a difference. Dumbing down removes important parts. Simplifying removes the unnecessary complexity that people add to sound smart. He could explain quantum electrodynamics, one of the most complex theories in physics, using simple language and diagrams. He won the Nobel Prize for that work in 1965. But here's what matters to you. If he could simplify quantum mechanics and you can't simplify what you learned in school, the problem isn't quantum mechanics. It's what school taught you. They gave you answers without understanding, complexity without clarity, credentials without competence, and they trained you to think this was normal. Watch what happens when you try the Feynman technique on something you learned in school. Pick any subject, anything they told you that you mastered. Now, explain it out loud like you're teaching a 12-year-old. No jargon allowed, no hiding behind technical terms. Just clear, simple explanation. You can't do it, can you? Not fully. There are gaps. Places where you realize you memorized words without understanding concepts. And that feeling you're experiencing right now, that discomfort, that's cognitive dissonance. The clash between what you thought you knew and what you actually understand. Schools never put you through that discomfort, because if they did, you discover they taught you nothing. So they kept you in the comfort zone of memorization, where you could feel smart without being challenged. They called it learning. Feynman would call it intellectual fraud. But it goes deeper than memorization. Schools taught you to fear looking stupid, to hide your confusion, to nod along when you don't understand because admitting ignorance feels like failure. This is the real damage, not what you failed to learn, what you learned to fear. Feynman never feared looking stupid. At Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project, surrounded by the greatest physicists on Earth, he'd ask basic questions. What exactly do you mean by that? Can you explain that more simply? I don't understand this part. Other scientists would mock him sometimes, thought he was slowing things down. Except his stupid questions often exposed flaws in their reasoning, flaws everyone else was too afraid to mention. In his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, he said, "I don't have to know an answer. I don't feel frightened by not knowing things." Schools taught you the opposite. They taught you that not knowing is shameful, that confusion is weakness, that questions make you look stupid. So, you learned to fake understanding, mastered the art of looking smart while knowing nothing. And you've been doing it ever since. This is why meetings waste hours, everyone pretending to understand, and no one admitting confusion. Because the first person to ask, "What does that actually mean?" looks stupid, except they're the only honest person in the room. Feynman would be that person. You were trained not to be. The deeper you go, the worse it gets. Because schools didn't just fail to teach you, they actively taught you wrong. They taught you that intelligence is about knowing answers. Feynman proved intelligence is about asking questions. They taught you to respect credentials. He proved credentials mean nothing. They taught you complex language signals, expertise. He demonstrated simple language signals, understanding. Every lesson they gave you was backwards, and they did it systematically, grade after grade, year after year, until it became so normal you never questioned it. Let's be specific about what this cost you. And that career you're stuck in, partly because you never learned to think critically, just follow procedures. That book you can't finish because reading was trained into tedious memorization instead of curious exploration. That skill you gave up on because school taught you that if you're not immediately good at something, you lack talent. These aren't personal failures. They're predicted outcomes of a broken system. Feynman relearned how to learn after Los Alamos. The bomb project had drained his curiosity, made physics feel like obligation instead of joy. So he went to Cornell and gave himself permission to play again, to study things just because they interested him. No practical application required, just pure curiosity. He was watching a student throw a plate in the cafeteria. The plate wobbled as it spun. Or Feynman noticed the Cornell medallion on the plate was rotating faster than the wobble, started calculating the relationship. No reason, no application. Just interesting. That play turned into work on electron spin. That work contributed to quantum electrodynamics. That contribution won the Nobel Prize. But schools taught you play is wasted time. They separated learning from joy, made knowledge something you accumulate for external rewards, grades, degrees, job prospects, never for internal satisfaction. So you learn to associate learning with stress, with performance anxiety, with proving yourself to others, and you wonder why you gave up on curiosity. It wasn't your fault. The system designed this outcome. Because curious students ask questions. Questions slow down the curriculum. Slow curriculum means less material covered, and the less material means lower test scores. Lower test scores mean less funding. So they trained curiosity out of you, called it discipline, called it focus, called it growing up. What they meant was, stop asking questions and memorize what we tell you. Feynman never stopped asking questions, never stopped playing. At Caltech, he was famous for showing up to random lectures in biology, astronomy, whatever interested him that day. Not his field, not his job, just curious. And often he'd point out things the experts missed, not because he was smarter, because he wasn't trapped in their specialized language. He could see what they couldn't because he didn't have years of training teaching him to not see it. This is the final piece that schools hid from you. Expertise can blind you. The more you know the specialized language of a field, the harder it becomes to see basic truths. You start mistaking the map for the territory, the terminology for the reality. NASA's engineers knew everything about rocket science, knew too much maybe, couldn't see what Feynman saw with fresh eyes and ice water. Your education gave you maps, taught you to worship maps, never taught you to check if the maps match reality. So now you navigate life using maps drawn by people who might be wrong, and when you get lost, you assume you read the map incorrectly. Never occurs to you the map itself might be garbage. When you combine these pieces, the memorization fraud, the credential worship, the fear of looking stupid, the death of curiosity, the blindness of expertise, you get exactly what schools produced. Millions of people with degrees who can't think clearly, can't learn independently, can't question authority, can't explain what they supposedly know. But here's the vindication you've been waiting for. This was never about your intelligence. You're not stupid. You were systematically miseducated by a system optimized for compliance, not understanding. Every time you struggled to understand something, everyone else seemed to grasp. Every time you forgot material right after the test, every time you felt like an imposter despite your credentials, that wasn't personal failure. That was the system working exactly as designed. Feynman proved an alternative exists. You can learn through curiosity instead of obligation, through questions instead of answers, through simplifying instead of complicating, through playing instead of grinding, through honesty about confusion instead of faking understanding, through testing your knowledge against reality instead of against what authorities tell you reality should be. As Feynman wrote in Surely You're Joking, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Schools taught you to fool yourself, taught you to accept complexity as proof of intelligence, to trust credentials over evidence, to value knowing the name over knowing the thing. And you believed them, because everyone around you believed them too. How could the entire system be wrong? Except the system is wrong, demonstrably, documentably wrong. Feynman proved it in Brazil, at Cornell, at Los Alamos, at the Challenger investigation, in every lecture and paper and conversation. The evidence is overwhelming. The only question is whether you're ready to see it. You don't need their system anymore. You needed their credentials to get through doors. Fine, you have them now. But you don't need their methods. Those methods failed you. They failed everyone. Feynman showed you the alternative. Ask real questions. Demand simple explanations. Test everything against reality. Never fake understanding. Choose curiosity over obligation. Value clarity over complexity. Trust evidence over authority. This isn't about becoming a physicist. This is about reclaiming your ability to think, the ability schools systematically destroyed, the ability Feynman spent his life protecting and developing and demonstrating. You were born curious. They trained it out of you. Now you know why. Now you know how. Now you have the tools to rebuild what they broke. The problem was never your intelligence. It was their method. Now you're finally free of it. But Feynman's war against false education didn't end with learning methods. He exposed something deeper, something that affects every decision you make, every expert you trust, every authority you defer to. The same thinking that revealed the lie in schools revealed another lie in how society decides what's true. And that lie is still controlling your life right now, whether you realize it or not.